It's so
Okay, welcome. Everybody got a seat? Okay. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We're going to start the special legislation meeting tonight. We've got a great turnout. My expectation is that we will work through this meeting in probably a shorter period of time than you might expect. And the reason for that is that the ordinance has been drafted, and let me start by saying that it doesn't, when you think about it, this ordinance is the product of a lot of folks' input, and it really represents what we usually do in Medina, and that is work together, recognize a goal, work together, and collaborate to find a way, like this piece of legislation, craft a piece of legislation that accomplishes the goal and is broadly accepted at the same time. You really can't do better than that. And there are a number of people in the room that deserve a lot of credit for the work that's been put in over these months. It's been maybe 8 months, maybe more, since we met first. So I think that's important to understand, because that really speaks well of the city, well of our community, and well of our purpose. So the ordinance that we will discuss and we're going to be voting on tonight prohibits discriminatory conduct on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. If you visit Medina, if you work in Medina, or if you live in Medina, the passage of this ordinance ensures your equal access to employment, housing, public accommodation, and educational institutions. The entire ordinance is 12 pages. The 12 pages, well-constructed pages, they provide protections that are really just a simple fix, in a way, a simple fix, but they level the playing field for everyone. That, I think, was the fundamental goal that we were working to achieve and that we have achieved. So this meeting will proceed tonight with comments from the law director on the specifics of the ordinance, comments from the mayor, members of this committee, the president of council, who played an integral part in putting this ordinance together, and attending members of council, and Pam Miller, who with her group initially brought the issue to us. So I'm going to turn it over to the law director first so that he can talk about how the ordinance has been transformed from what we were originally talking about to the current ordinance that we have that we'll vote on tonight. Mr. Huber?
Thank you, Bill. I'd like to thank the women who worked with us from Equality Ohio. Very patient. Some of the conversations have been blunt. The legal side of it is a little bit dry and sometimes a little bit negative, because there's a lot to deal with when you're talking about litigation and involving discrimination issues. The other reality is that the city of Medina is a small city. Our law department is 4 part-time lawyers. We don't have the firepower that you have in the county of Cuyahoga or in Summit County to put lawyers on this issue. And if you get into litigation, it becomes pretty heated. And if you have both sides at one another, you need trained judges really best to deal with those issues. Our approach involves primarily, at least initially, a mediation approach with enforcement through the law department, which I'm the head of at this point in time. This is a first step. I really, as I indicated in my remarks when we first took this up, this area of law really needs to be addressed by the state and federal governments. We can do what we can do, and this legislation is a first step in that direction. to try to accommodate both the needs of the petitioner who's aggrieved and also protect the rights of the person who is attempting to respond to the complaint. I agree with what Bill said. I've been a law director for almost 20 years. Here in Medina, I believe that people listen to one another. They work together even when there's disagreement. We find a way, and I think that's what we did with this ordinance. And again, I'd like to thank the folks from Equality Ohio for the patience and the work and support and the disagreements that occurred. I enjoyed work with them. This is an interesting area of law. It's on the front edge, and we've attempted to do the best we can with it.
Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to go over a little bit of what Bill said, John Coyne, as the council president, was instrumental in helping to write some of the language for us. Mr. Huber, Mr. Hunt from Walter and Haverfield, and Equality Ohio then worked out some of the details, and that's why this has taken us close to 7 months to get back to an ordinance that is acceptable to the administration from the city of Medina, the law department in particular, the council, as far as I'm aware, and as well as Equality Ohio and their perspective. What we really have is two ordinances. One is the adoption of a new ordinance, which is Chapter 717, that deals with the discriminatory conduct in housing, employment, and public accommodations based on sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. The other is an amendment to an existing ordinance that we have. The first is a civil process. The second is a criminal matter, which is already ethnic intimidation in the city's general offenses code. That's been amended to just intimidation. And then we added the words for reason of sex, gender identity, or expression or sexual orientation. So it's covered both in that section if somebody is intimidated or harassed criminally, to include that, as well as the civil application of the new ordinance, Chapter 717. And I agree with Chairman Lamb that we have worked very hard together to come to a resolution that we feel is good for the city, good for the community, and are hopeful that this ordinance will be passed by the council of the city of Medina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. President of Council John Coyne, would you like to make some comments?
Thank you, Bill. As was said, this was a long process, and I guess we talked about this ordinance, but we never really said, well, what does it do? And when we started out, we had an ordinance that was kind of adopted throughout Ohio, or at least northern Ohio, in several communities that had a civil rights commission attached to it. Now, you have to remember, we're a city of about 26,000 people. To form a civil rights commission in our size would be very difficult. And I don't really think it would work. And that was kind of my biggest problem with the original ordinance is, you know, every community is different. We can't be treated the same across the board. So we had to work with this ordinance and be somewhat flexible to make it work for Medina. And it probably worked for some other communities also. So we went through it and we removed the Civil Rights Commission portion of it. We also removed language that covered, you know, race, religion, and other protected classes already, because that was also in there. So even though there's laws that exist, they could come to Medina if we had adopted the original platform to come before Medina's a Civil Rights Commission to talk about a religious issue or talk about a race issue. And we're not adapt to cover those types of issues. I think the law covers it, so we decided we have to eliminate it. So it's very specific and very detailed as far as what we want to cover. So let's go through an example. So you wouldn't go to an employment situation and you go there and you feel like you were discriminated based upon your sexual orientation. You would have the right then to come to Greg Huber and say, I'm going to file a complaint because I believe that I wasn't hired because of my sexual orientation. And Greg Huber say, well, what type of evidence do you have? And if you come probably and say, well, I just think that's the reason why. Well, I don't know how great that's going to work. So you have to, there's going to have to be some evidence searching that Greg Huber would do. And then Greg Huber would, send a notice out to the employer, and they'll go through the process to gather that evidence. And then once all the evidence is gathered, Mr. Huber will then make a determination based upon the law if there is enough to justify a cause of action or a claim, let's call it, that will go to mediation. And maybe during the previous time to mediation, if there's something that did occur, it could be settled. If it doesn't, it goes to mediation, and the mediator, which is going to be another lawyer, would come in that's kind of well-versed in the civil rights and the First Amendment rights, would look at it and make a determination of do we have a violation and has there discrimination has occurred in this situation. And once the mediator comes to a conclusion or a resolution that kind of both parties come to an agreement is reached, then that would be the agreement of the parties and it would move forward. If, for example, the law director determines a claim has happened and he sends out a notice to go to mediation and one of the parties decide not to go, well, then there could be a civil fine against that party for not showing up, whether it be the complainant or the employer. And then, then the law director can enforce the payment of that fine if somebody decides not to pay it. So it's kind of a logical process that goes through it. Now, there's no court action, of course, right? Because there's no enabling legislation under Ohio Revised Code or the federal law for somebody to sue. But this provides a mechanism or a venue that the accused and the accuser can get together and solve the problem if it can be solved. And it's based upon evidentiary fact-finding by the law director, which is, I think, very helpful. So this ordinance, that's how it would work, and that's how it's covered. It does not have a civil rights commission. It leaves it up to the lawyers. I know you don't like that, but it leaves it up to the lawyers to make a determination if, in fact, a claim is viable or not viable, or if there's a false claim that was made. I mean, there's risk on both sides. It's not all one-sided here. So if a false claim is made, the person making the false claim could be, they just get dismissed. And after enough false claims are made, nobody's going to believe that person anymore. But again, on the employer side of it, if the employer continues to discriminate over and over again, it'll keep going through the process, and civil penalties may be levied against the accused, and that's how that would work. So, and it also provides an avenue that if the law ever does change, the law director can make a determination of what other remedies would be available at the law director's disposal. But if there is ever a federal or state law that comes enacted, I don't know if the city of Medina would want to be involved anymore, because there would probably be a better venue to go after, because I'm thinking at the state level and federal level, when they do enabling legislation, it'll be more detailed than what we could do, because we can't do any kind of criminal action in this, because this is not a crime, it's a civil action. Now, it is a crime, as the mayor mentioned, if there's intimidation involved and there's continual harassment, just like anything else. All the other protected classes are in that ordinance, and it's under the criminal section. So if somebody continually harasses or does things to an individual, and it's shown that this is a pattern of conduct that raises to what I would call a hate crime, well, then you got criminal penalties against that person, which I hope nobody rises to that level in the city of Medina, but there are protections there of all different protected classes in that regard, now including sexual orientation and decisions of that type. So going through this process, it was a great learning experience for me. I'm glad I was involved in it. I think this is a workable ordinance, both these ordinances, for a town our size. And I think that it'll accomplish the goals of what I wanted to accomplish, is to send a message not only to the people of Medina, but to the students. I think it's very important that the students in high school and elementary school understand that their leaders do not support any type of discrimination, and hopefully do not support bullying, because that's the message we want to send to our kids, is everybody's equal.
Thank you, John. Mr. Huber?
Last thing I'd like to add is a special thanks to Todd Hunt, who is seated next to me. He's a colleague who works up in Cleveland with the Walter & Halverfield firm. His associate, Ben Shinaki, worked on this I think this is a pretty good ordinance. It would not have be as good an ordinance without some of the assistance from these two lawyers who are quite knowledgeable with respect to discrimination law that they work with regularly in Cleveland, and their assistance has been quite great. I want to thank them.
Thank you. Paul, you want to go next? You have comments?
Okay, I thought you wanted Pam to talk.
No, not yet.
Not yet? All right, okay.
Do you want to have Pam go first?
That's all right, I'm fine, thank you. All right, I do want to thank the mayor, Mr. Huber, Mr. Hunt, and Mr. Coyne for their hard work in putting this together, because quite frankly, when I read the initial legislation, proposed legislation, I read it and I said, this is a full employment act for lawyers. They're the only ones who would win. The employers would lose, the prospective employee would lose, but the lawyers would collect their fees. And they would be the only ones who win. I'm glad that John's smirking there. I'm glad that this ordinance was put together as it is, because it is a win-win. You've heard me say in public meetings before, I believe in education, not legislation. With this mediation, we can educate people and reduce the chances of this going along. Are people going to discriminate against each other? Yeah, it happens all the time. All of us do it. I've seen examples of it of myself in my neighborhood. People, that's enough. But it happens, all right? People are people, okay? And we're not going to get around it. But this will help the groups that are that identify with this. And I do believe that it'll move us in the right direction. I see one young gentleman here who spoke passionately when he was here before, and one thought that came to my mind, you were very concerned about losing your job because who you identify with. I am in one of those groups that I'm a gray-haired white guy with a U.S.-based salary working in an international company. Okay? If I don't distinguish myself as being somebody who's valuable, that causes my employer to keep me because of what I provide to my company, I'm going to be out the door too. Okay, so it's not you. It's what you contribute to your organization. It's what you contribute to make yourself better than all your other people, that when it comes time for force cuts, they're not going to consider you, because they're going to say, we got to keep him or her, as the case may be, because they would lose something by letting you go. So that's my advice, not only to that fine young gentleman, but everybody here when you're out there in the workforce. The self-fulfilling prophecy. Geez, I think this is going to happen. You start behaving that it will happen that way, and yeah, you're going to get fired. But if you start thinking the other way, hey, I'm better than everybody, you won't get fired. It happens, trust me. Okay? So with that, again, I want to thank everybody for their hard work, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that comes forward here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Eric?
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you to everyone that took their time putting this together. It's certainly been a longer process than I thought it would be, but that's for all the right reasons. They took their time with it. They made sure that it fit what Medina needed, and I hope that this is an effective law. I want to start by saying Medina is home. It's been my home for 24 years now, and it's been named Hometown USA back in the 40s when they made that movie starring the city. It was named Ohio Magazine's best hometown this past year, and we were so proud of it that we put that sign all over the city. Driving down the roads, you can see best hometown. Medina is home, and I hate to think that for some citizens, Medina may be afraid that they'd be losing their home because of their ability to work or pay their expenses. I'm sorry. They would lose their home not because they are afraid. Hold on. To lose their home not because of their ability to work or pay for their expenses, but because they can lose their home or employment simply for being born the way they are. There are also people out there who would love to call Medina home, but if given the chance to live somewhere where they know their rights are protected, or live somewhere where it is completely legal to evict or fire them for simply loving a person that someone else disapproves of, they will live somewhere else other than our beautiful hometown. Nearby communities have already pass these ordinances and put them in place to protect the rights of the LGBTQ community, and it is not hard to imagine them choosing to live and work elsewhere if we choose to ignore their needs. The goal of this ordinance is to help prevent discrimination. Its purpose is to create an equal opportunity for all. There are no special privileges here. It is only giving the LGBTQ community the same rights as any other citizen, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of these things are hard to achieve if you are not free to live your life without fear of losing your home or employment. I believe this is a step in the right direction, and I hope that the rest of council, this administration, and this city will take the steps needed with me to make Medina a home for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hevinger. There are other council people that are here, and I don't know if any of you would like to comment. You would like to comment tonight, or if you would like to wait until next week. Just raise your hand for. Okay, I don't see any hands. Everybody's waiting. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're ready for you, Pam. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb and members of the committee. I'm pleased to hear all of the positive statements that were made tonight, but I do want to just emphasize a few points for just a few moments. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Equality Medina. As you know, at a previous special legislation committee meeting, we provided extensive testimony from many different people. That testimony stands, and I believe you all have copies of what was said that night. So we will try to keep our comments brief tonight and will not be fielding an army of speakers at this time. Over the past number of months, Council President John Coyne, Law Director Greg Huber, and Attorney Todd Hunt have worked with us to formulate an ordinance that will work well for the city as it provides protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So we thank them as well as Mayor Hanwell for your time and involvement in crafting this ordinance that is so important for our community. Now, some may argue that local legislation is unnecessary because laws have already been proposed at the federal and state level. And indeed, the House of Representatives has passed the Equality Act that would amend Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to provide employment non-discrimination protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But this amendment has yet to be heard in the Senate, and it's uncertain that the Senate will move on it. Similarly, Senate Bill 11, the Ohio Fairness Act, has been reintroduced and has bipartisan sponsors. One hearing has been held so far, but again, it's uncertain as to how it will proceed through the legislature. But the more cities across Ohio that adopt non-discrimination policies, the more likely the state will feel the groundswell of opinion and in turn pass a statewide law. And the same holds true for Congress. As more states pass such laws, the more likely a federal law becomes. It's also important to note that there is widespread support in the business community. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce recently sent a letter of support to Congress stating that equality under the law fosters an environment where America's diverse workforce can reach its full potential without fear of discrimination. Embracing equality has a profoundly positive impact on business performance. A recent report from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation found that LGBT inclusive communities enjoy higher revenue margins, attract better talent, and have lower employee turnover. And that's a quote from their letter. 40 trade and professional associations, including the U.S. Chamber, the American Medical Association, Financial Executives International, the National Restaurant Association, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the Real Estate Roundtable also sent a letter of support to Congress, saying, quote, "Equality of opportunity is a key pillar of our great democracy, one that allows all people to pursue their American dream and part of what makes our nation exceptional. Our industries, representing tens of millions of Americans, understand this basic fact. To include protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity is a sensible approach to ensure consistency with other protected classes." The Ohio Chamber of Commerce, along with 600 businesses, large and small, who have signed on to Ohio Business Competes, supports the Ohio Fairness Act, and a good number of these businesses are located in the Medina area. Republican State Senator Michael Rulli of Salem, co-sponsor of the Ohio Fairness Act, was quoted as saying, It's almost embarrassing that it's 2019 and we are still dealing with this issue. This is to let the whole country know that Ohio is open for business for all Americans. So we can help get these bills passed by moving forward with a city ordinance in Medina that says that all are welcome here. It's simply the right thing to do. We hope that tonight you will vote this ordinance as well as the amendment to Section 54108 out of committee to Council of the Whole at the Finance Committee, and then to the Council floor for a full vote at the earliest possible time. And any of us would be happy to answer any questions or offer any further clarifications if necessary. Thank you.
Okay, we have two ordinances, so we're gonna do a motion, a second on the first ordinance. We'll have discussion here, and then we'll vote, and then we'll do the same for the second ordinance, discussion again here, and then we will vote again. So we're gonna go ahead and start. Here, Paul.
All right. Doesn't have a number on it. Okay. I move that the ordinance adopting a new Chapter 717 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Medina to prohibit discriminatory conduct on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity or expression.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Paul?
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Huber or John or Mr. Hunt could answer this. I've got a few questions. On page 6 of the copy I have, 717.04. Part B, for a proprietor or their employee to keep, manage, place of public accommodation, circulate, issue, or display, post, mail, or either directly or indirectly, any printed or written communication. Does that in any way, shape, or form violate any freedoms of expression already protected by the Constitution?
Well, I suppose there could be an argument made for that, although that's not the intent of this ordinance. And it's fairly narrowly geared toward discrimination involving sexual orientation. And so I don't think that it violates the rule on free expression. If somebody claimed that it did violate the rule for free expression, that's an issue that could be taken to a judge for a decision on that. And so the issue ultimately gets decided on a case-by-case basis, depending upon what people are saying and what is being argued about.
Okay, thank you. And then further down here on page 10 of 12, under penalties, 1. I'm not sure I understand the meaning of this. The administrator may impose civil penalties and may issue a cease and desist order, ... for a violation or breach of a mediation agreement and or for any other violation of this chapter of following amounts. Okay, I'm not sure I understand the and or part of that and the rest of that.
I'll let Todd address that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we wanted to, first of all, the original proposal was that these have criminal penalties. We felt it was important to not have criminal penalties. We've taken this out of the proposed general offenses code and put it in the business regulation code. And the business regulation code.
Thank you.
Public accommodations, employment, and even educational pursuits are business issues, and that's why we felt it should be there, and you should never have civil penalties in the general offenses code. And so we have proposed civil penalties, at least in the first instance, for any violation of the chapter, as well as a breach of a mediation agreement, which the two parties have agreed to, and one party decides to breach that. And those civil penalties would be imposed by notice. If the person who violates and receives a civil penalty refuses to pay it, then there is a remedy to go to the municipal court to seek payment of that civil penalty. At that point, the violator would have their due process with respect to that civil penalty. We felt that the Ohio Revised Code, the way it's worded, has given the municipal court the authority to hear violations of municipal ordinances. That's specifically what the Revised Code says. And I have used civil penalties in other communities for other purposes. So I think that it's completely defensible with respect to that, and could be applied for any violation of the chapter, as well as a breach of the mediation agreement.
Thank you. And
I guess the other thing I would say, if mediation is not successful, then the administrator, who is the law director, would move forward with a full investigation and determination if there's a violation of the ordinance.
okay, all right, thank you. And then I'm not sure if I understand on page 12 of 12, 717.11, non-exclusive remedies. A person's decision to seek remedies provided for this chapter shall not toll any statute of limitations. What's meant by not toll any statute of limitations?
Sure. Well, we don't know what is going to come forward with respect to whether the courts are going to say there's some remedy that would be provided otherwise besides this ordinance. So that's why we put this sort of catch-all in there. I'm not aware of anything at this point, but that doesn't mean that a court, even the Common Pleas Court of Medina County, might find some type of cause of action with respect to these same types of issues that we've raised or that we have in this ordinance. So it's really a catch-all.
Okay, so that means that the time frame described above could fall by the wayside based on this, should a common pleas court say. Is that how I understand it?
Yeah, certainly. I don't know what the cause of action will be. I don't know what the statute of limitations may be for that. And there may be a situation where the Ohio Equality Act actually gets, Fairness Act, actually gets passed, and you may not have actually repealed your ordinance, or for some reason you don't wish to repeal the ordinance, to see how the Ohio Fairness Act plays out. And so therefore, I assume the Ohio Fairness Act would have some type of statute of limitations. And this is advising the complainant that don't rely solely on this ordinance to push or put forward your grievances. You may have another cause of action, whether state or federal law, and those have statute of limitations.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. We'll have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 3-0. Paul, you want a second motion on the second ordinance for us?
Did I hear the motion? You want to have a motion?
Yeah,
first?
do you want to go ahead and do the motion on the second one? Yes. Yes. Yes.
I thought you wanted me to second that.
No, you could second if you want, but we'll just do one thing at a time.
I'll let
Eric, go ahead.
Motion to pass the ordinance amending 54108 of the Codified Ordinance of the City of Medina to prohibit intimidation on the basis of sex, gender identity, or expression, or sexual orientation.
Any discussion? Paul? Todd?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this ordinance is not an ordinance unto itself. You have to have an underlying or a predicate crime that's been committed before you can implement the intimidation piece of it. So, for example, if there's an assault, if there's a battery, if there's harassment, if there's property damage, and the motive behind that is discrimination, whether it be based on race, religion, ethnicity, your sex, or your gender identity, et cetera, that would then be another crime in and of itself. But you have to have that first predicate crime before this would be implemented.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 3-0. Okay, let me say this. When I started out, I said this is a simple fix. It's a 12 pages or so. There are 2 ordinances. It was all explained in detail. There was a lot of help to put this together, to make this work. In one sense, this is how government's supposed to work. Cooperatively, together, disagreeing, finding a solution, coming together, achieving a goal. That's what we would expect from our government, and as much as we expected from the folks that we serve, you know, who have played, whether you were initially pro or initially con, had doubts or questions, came together again as a community, as we always have here, in a really exceptional way. And look what we have done. We have sent, by working together, we have sent a serious message. One that does speak to, as the President of Council said, speak to children in this community, speak to adults, speaks to people that want to come here and visit to see this beautiful place, speaks to people that want to come here just to go to dinner and do that without fear. It really recognizes, in a sense, I guess, that love thy neighbor, but maybe not as a slogan, but maybe as a reality, that someday, sometime, we will move beyond this idea that we have to have conversations about what each of us believes in, or how we dress, or how we look, or how we feel about ourselves, and then we can talk about and think about and be part of even a larger community than we always have. And that is a community that we recognize people simply to their fullest, for who they are, and that's okay, and that's accepted, and we can move on to other things, other priorities, and let these other old kind of antiquated, discarded ideas go where they probably ought to go. And it gives you hope, I think, that every day allows us the opportunity to set aside fears and to set aside those kinds of concerns, and to just simply fully embrace humanity, and for all of us here together, work together for a larger purpose, for a successful community. So, you know, let me say I am thankful for everybody that came and participated, the administration, Todd Hunt, Greg Huber, the mayor, all the folks that brought this to us, the members of City Council, the members of this committee, and all the help we got from you to make this a success. Now, this is not the end. We will convene again on Finance Committee a week from tonight, and this legislation will go through Finance Committee, and then we will meet a last time on July 8th at a full council meeting, when this will go before full council for passage. And again, I welcome you to attend those meetings as well, show your support. and show your support for these. So thank you. God bless you. We have been successful. The meeting is adjourned.